Laredo International Airport, Texas.
Continental Express is such a watershed moment for accident investigation.
Outside looks good.
Okay, I've done the cockpit scans. We're set for the before start checklist.
Continental Express Flight 2574.
It happened extremely fast.
The force was so violent, the plane was unflyable.
Oh my God, look.
I was a little bit scared when I first saw the wreckage.
I told him that I thought it was a bomb went off.
Kaboom! The wreckage will tell a chilling story.
If they had strictly followed those procedures, this accident should not have happened.
Of good intentions gone terribly wrong.
Mayday, Mayday.
They're going to bring everybody in on 26 or 27.
Okie dokie.
Autopilot off.
Continental Express Flight 2574 and its 11 passengers nears the end of its 1-hour flight from Laredo to Houston, Texas. It's the second flight of the day for this crew. They've already flown from Houston to Laredo. Now they're on their way back. 15,000 feet below, it's a warm, late summer morning on the farms and cattle ranches of southern Texas.
Captured on the right.
The pilots prepare the Embraer 120 Brasilia for another routine landing. Captain Brad Patridge is just 29 years old. 43-year-old First Officer Clint Radosevich is now very close to becoming a captain himself. They are 110 kilometers from Houston, home for both pilots.
Pushing this descent, making like the space shuttle.
In the blink of an eye, the plane is plummeting towards the ground. It drops 2,000 feet in just a few seconds. Far below, Carey Larby and his brother Clifton are working on their farm.
My brother and I heard the explosion. We both looked up in the air, and it was, oh my God, look. Seen a plane coming out of the air. The plane was spiraling.
Flight 2574 plummets to the ground at more than 500 kilometers an hour.
When it hit the ground, there was a massive explosion. My brother said, let's go. And I said, man, I really don't
think there's anything I want to see there.
When I made the 911 call, they were asking for directions, and I told them, I said, all you have to do is follow the smoke.
What we see on the ground is not recognizable in any shape, form, or fashion as having been an airplane.
Firefighters find the smoldering wreckage of the aircraft in the middle of a farmer's field near Eagle Lake, Texas, just 110 kilometers west of Houston.
As you went there, you If you wouldn't have knew it was an airplane, you would have just thought it was a pile of trash. It was burnt so far.
10 bodies were found inside the wreckage, 4 outside.
All 14 people on board, including Patridge and Radosevich, are dead. Accident investigators must now figure out why lives were lost on a popular commuter flight.
Whenever one passenger dies in a scheduled flight, we launch an entire team. That's understood. We have about 12 specialties that form the GO team, and we have to be prepared to launch on 3 to 4 hours notice.
Jim Ritter is an engineer who specializes in airplane mechanics.
One of the key things that we do in every accident investigation is we try to figure out why did the airplane behave the way it did. Was it normal performance, or was there a malfunction that can explain what caused the accident? I was a little bit scared when I first saw the wreckage. The airplane was destroyed, and there wasn't a lot to go on.
Deepak Joshi is an expert on the structure of the aircraft itself.
I went straight to the main wreckage where I found most of the airplane. My first order of business was to locate the 4 corners of the airplane.
The small plane was a Brazilian-made twin turboprop, the Embraer 120. Its size and speed have made it popular with regional airlines in the US. The Continental Express fleet includes 34 of the aircraft.
The first day, when we got down there, I led the group in terms of interviewing 6 witnesses. And one of them reported that the airplane appeared to be in a routine descent to the airport, and as he watched it, he saw that there was an explosion.
There was an explosion.
I told him that I thought it was a bomb.
Bomb went off, and it was spiraling as it went down.
When it hit the ground, there was a secondary explosion.
And kaboom!
The primary explosion is what caused us to go, oh my God.
I could see a hole in it.
It looked like it had a hole in it about the size of a Volkswagen.
The eyewitnesses were unanimous that the airplane was on fire before it reached the ground.
Seen this plane, solid fire, just the outside wings and going straight down.
The wing was blown completely off, and it was just dangling there.
The eyewitness testimony is compelling. An onboard explosion caused by a bomb seems like a very real possibility. Agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation are quickly on the scene, looking for evidence of foul play.
The FAA said that they believed that there had been a mid-air explosion and it went off the screen very rapidly.
The FBI had gotten a report that someone had placed a bomb on the aircraft, and they were being very careful and making sure that there was no evidence of any kind of bomb or criminal activity.
The NTSB has heard reports of a federally protected witness testifying in a Laredo drug trial who was reportedly booked on the Continental flight. The suspect missed the flight after the trial ran late.
What I'm telling you is our investigators have nothing on that. I don't know how much more clear I can be on that.
The wreckage itself gives the investigators an immediate clue about the crash.
I saw the cockpit was there, the fuselage was there. The left wing had folded under the right wing, and a portion of the vertical stabilizer was there. But the horizontal stabilizer was missing.
The Embraer 120 is what's called a T-tail airplane. The horizontal stabilizer sits on top of the vertical stabilizer.
And then I wondered, where could it be?
200 meters away, well back from the main wreckage, Joshi finds the missing tail section.
Can someone help me get a bearing on this?
That made me believe that there is definitely an in-flight breakup of an airplane.
All right.
A lot of the various pieces were scattered around, so one of the key questions that we kept asking ourselves was, what happened first? What initiated this event?
I'm guessing that tail came off at about 9,000 feet.
There's something there, something speaking to us in that evidence.
Deciphering the message won't be easy, but as the story of Flight 2574 unfolds, investigators will uncover a shocking accident scenario unlike anything seen before.
All 14 people aboard were killed, among them the pilot, Captain Brad Patridge of Kingwood.
NTSB investigators recover the black boxes from the rear fuselage of Continental Express Flight 2574.
The recorders are pivotal in our work. It's really what gives us a window into what happened. If we didn't have the flight data recorder, we don't have the cockpit voice recorder, we don't have a lot of information to go on.
The black boxes will be rushed to Washington for analysis. Investigators focus next on the plane's severed tail.
There is a missing piece of the puzzle, and it does not reach the main wreckage. That's where the focus tends to go.
From its position 200 meters back from the rest of the wreckage, investigators can tell it was one of the first parts to come off the plane. They wonder if corrosion or metal fatigue may have weakened the tail to the point of failure. When a piece of metal bends back and forth over time, it eventually snaps. Called fatigue, that failure is identified by a smooth, clean break.
We started to look at the fracture surfaces of the vertical stabilizer.
But the edges of the tail section aren't smooth. They're jagged.
In this particular accident, we did not see any brown color rust.
No corrosion, no fatigue.
The fracture surfaces clearly indicate that the tail was ripped off suddenly. In Washington, NTSB technicians opened the black boxes.
The cockpit voice recorder is our single most important piece of evidence. It records everything that's said, all sounds in the cockpit for the last half hour before impact. You can hear cockpit sounds that can be very helpful. So you can hear what the engines are doing, you can hear a whole bunch of things. We do analysis on that.
But no voice recorder comes with a guarantee. It's a complicated piece of electronics, hooked up to several microphones. After slamming into the ground at more than 500 kilometers an hour, there's a chance the recording may be damaged or lost. In Texas, the FBI field unit finishes testing remnants of the plane for any residue from explosives.
I think a bomb went off.
The results are conclusive. There was no bomb on board Flight 2574.
It became pretty obvious that we had a structural reason for the accident and not really a bomb or any kind of criminal event.
The fire and a mid-air explosion reported by witnesses were likely caused when the wing broke off, igniting the fuel inside. Investigators discover that the tail section did not fall off in one piece.
I noticed that the leading edge on the left side horizontal stabilizer was missing. This is very unusual. Maybe a small section of the leading edge would be missing, but not the whole complete 10-foot section.
The leading edge on the right side is still attached to the stabilizer, but the one on the left is missing entirely.
So, when did this piece break off?
A key question there is, what was the first part that came off of the airplane? Because a lot of times, the initiating event is going to be found in those early parts that break from the airplane in an in-flight breakup.
It's now vitally important for investigators to find the missing leading edge. It's a piece of molded composite material 3 meters long. Its rounded shape allows air to pass smoothly over the stabilizer. But the missing piece can't be found anywhere near the crash site.
We really needed it, and there was a growing frustration because we thought this part was critical.
Without it, they don't have all the pieces of the aircraft. More importantly, they're missing the piece that most likely came off first.
That piece of evidence was very, very important for this investigation. And we made our best effort to find this leading edge.
The FAA asked us to assist in the search. We walked our property. I knew every bit of that property.
As searchers comb the area, Jim Ritter receives a copy of the CVR data from the lab in Washington. The good news is that the recording is intact. The pilot's final moments have been clearly captured.
Radio check.
Ritter wants to see if they discussed a developing crisis, or perhaps were forced to make a sudden maneuver to avoid an oncoming obstacle.
If the airplanes are flying within 6,000 to 8,000 feet, you might have some involvement of birds.
But the twin turboprop was flying much higher, well above any threat of a bird strike.
Radio check.
I can hear you loud and clear.
As you also.
Okay, I'll get you some ATIS.
But the CVR is mostly filled with the sound of controllers giving the pilots routine instructions.
Jetling 2574, say your heading.
050.
Jetling 2574, roger. Fly heading 030.
And normal conversation between the pilots.
Got a few days off coming up. Gonna head down to the coast, little R&R, little golf.
There are no hints of trouble on this flight until the first officer pushes his plane into a rapid descent towards Houston.
Pushing this descent, making like the space shuttle.
Well, the CVR showed us that the flight crew was totally professional. I mean, they were not doing anything that they shouldn't have been doing.
Investigators listen for any other clues. The sounds of objects being upset in the cockpit. The engines suddenly screaming. The blare of flight warning alarms.
Stall. Stall. Stall.
But there's no more conversation at all. The recording tells investigators that Patridge and Radosevich had absolutely no advance warning of their plane's sudden plunge.
The event happened extremely fast. I don't think there was anything that the crew could have done.
An analysis of the flight data recorder comes to the same conclusion.
We didn't see anything unusual about the accident flight until the very instant that we had the pitch down.
Until the plane went into a dive at near top speed and broke up, there was nothing abnormal about this flight. The cause of the crash remains a mystery. Finding the one missing piece of the tail is now more important than ever.
We were doing marches through the area, and after several days went by, it was difficult. We had flights by the local volunteer groups were flying over the site.
They're searching a 12 square kilometer area for a 3-meter long composite piece. Finding it is a long shot.
There was this growing theme that we have to find that part. And there was a frustration that it was way more difficult than we thought.
We had engineers from the aircraft manufacturer helping to tell us how heavy the parts were.
Do you have the weight of the piece?
The dimensions of the parts so that we could figure out what drag levels we might see.
Ritter logs the coordinates of the crash site. He studies the weather patterns from the day of the accident.
So I took that information, put it together, and calculated where the leading edge radius should be.
Finally, he comes up with a possible location for the missing piece.
I think it's somewhere in here.
Over the next couple of days, we went to that area and we laid out a grid to search for it. We searched for it on in the four-wheelers and in the helicopter.
On the third day of the search, some good news.
We were flying over the Texas countryside, big cattle country. Suddenly the pilot sitting next to me said, "I think I say it."
The piece is in the area predicted, but it's so well camouflaged that it was nearly impossible to spot.
People had walked by it hundreds of times, but it just happened to blend in with the cattle fence.
Hey, Jim, we found it, and it's just where you said it was.
Of course it is. You just weren't looking hard enough.
We had spent several days, all day long days and nights, calculating where to look, and so I was elated when we finally found the part.
Now that the leading edge has been found, investigators believe they finally have all the pieces of the plane.
We were really excited because it's important. You want to do your best to understand what happened in an accident. And if you didn't have the key part, there would always be questions.
Right away, they noticed something unusual.
The evidence indicated that the leading edge upper surface holes were absolutely clean, no elongation, no damage.
But the holes that hold the piece to the bottom of the stabilizer look quite different.
The lower surface holes onto the leading edge were elongated, they were cracked, as if you have pulled it through the fasteners.
The missing piece was found over a kilometer southwest of the tail section. There is no question it was the first piece to fall off the plane.
See, look here, look here. Absolutely perfect on top, but destroyed at the bottom.
The fact that the screw holes on the top of the leading edge aren't damaged presents a frightening prospect.
It looked like there was no screws attached onto the top surface of the horizontal stabilizer leading edge.
The discovery presents the team with two important questions. Why were the screws missing? And
could losing this actually cause the plane to crash?
The leading edge improves the aerodynamics of the plane, but it's not a moving part that controls direction. It's hard to see how losing it would cause the plane to plummet from the sky.
At that time, I was kind of surprised that losing a composite leading edge would actually cause such a severe impact.
Now that all the pieces of the plane have been found, the investigation moves to NTSB headquarters in Washington, D.C.
Well, we were just trying to put all the pieces of the puzzle together and try to make sure that we understood what the motion of the airplane was after the leading edge radius broke off.
The horizontal stabilizer is like an upside-down wing. It pushes the tail down while the wings lift it up. Reducing the force on the stabilizer lifts the tail and makes the flight unstable.
There were still questions about maybe it would still be controllable. And so we did an engineering simulation to try to see if maybe there was a way that the airplane could still fly after it lost the leading edge. But we found that it really was not a controllable situation. After the leading edge radius broke off of the airplane, it was a -5G pitch over. Once the angle of attack exceeded the negative limits, it actually broke the wing apart. So it was not a survivable event.
The simulations are conclusive. Losing just one leading edge along the horizontal stabilizer will send the plane into a catastrophic nosedive. Precisely what witnesses say happened to Flight 2574.
If there's any component of the wing that you don't want to lose, it's the leading edge.
The team now knows what triggered the crash, the loss of the stabilizer's leading edge. But what they still don't know is why the part seems not to have been properly attached. Examining the maintenance records for the aircraft, Brenner makes a disturbing find. A maintenance crew worked on the horizontal stabilizer the night before the accident.
The evidence was mounting that we really needed to look in depth at the maintenance procedures done the night before and the maintenance area.
Continental Express is one of the most popular carriers in the United States. The lives of thousands of passengers depend on the entire fleet of aircraft being properly maintained. Investigators urgently need to find out what went wrong in the hours leading up to the crash. NTSB investigator Malcolm Brenner travels to Houston Intercontinental Airport to talk to the maintenance crew that worked on the plane the night before it crashed.
In general, we wanted to visit the facility to see what the facility looked like, and then to go through specifically what had been done the evening before.
Now, many times, a lot of work happens on these overnight shifts, and they have to get an airplane back out to fly the next day.
Terry Von Thaden teaches aviation safety. She uses Flight 2574 as a case study.
So there's a push to turn this aircraft around quickly. Sometimes you can get the work done, sometimes you can't.
In preparation for winter, Continental Express had been inspecting and repairing the de-ice boots on its fleet of Embraer 120s. The de-ice boot is a rubber bladder that can be inflated by the pilots to break up ice on the wings and tail.
We wanted to interview every mechanic, supervisor, and inspection person who took part in that activity.
Brenner is particularly interested in 3 employees. Shift Supervisor Adam Dillon, Troy Anderson, an inspector responsible for checking the work of the mechanics, and the evening shift supervisor who started the job, John LePage.
Thanks for taking the time. So, what was the plan for the night?
We had about 10 hours to change both boots.
Replacing the boot involves removing the leading edge, stripping the old boot off it, and putting on a new one. The entire piece gets screwed back onto the horizontal stabilizer.
This is a big job to do all in one night.
It was scheduled to have these replaced during the midnight shift. Somehow, the evening shift had some extra time and decided they can help out, get this airplane out, so we'll get it started.
Grab what you need, I'll get the boots.
Watching over the work being done by the mechanics is Inspector Troy Anderson.
I had some time to lend a hand. We went up to the stabilizer to start the job.
Mechanics started working on the bottom. The inspector volunteered to climb up on top of the thing and get the top ones.
The evening shift, the second shift of the day, was going to remove the screws holding the leading edge in place. The rest of the work would be done by the midnight shift. At 10 p.m., Adam Dillon takes over as supervisor for the midnight shift.
Hey, finishing a C check, engine maintenance, and a boot swap.
Both sides?
Yep.
Shift change is such a crucial time because we're taking work that's halfway done, and we have to be very, very specific about what's been done and what the other people are taking over.
When I came onto my shift, I asked how far they got on the de-ice boots.
The mechanics find that many of the screws are stripped. Getting them out takes longer than expected.
I found out they were still trying to remove the leading edge on the right side, and it was looking like they weren't going to get both sides done.
Then a crucial decision is made.
You started on the left side yet?
No.
The crew that started work on the de-ice boots went home at 10:30.
There's no way we were going to get both sides done, so I decided to just do the right side that night.
Investigators learned that the supervisor of the midnight shift decided there wasn't enough time to do both sides.
Guys, forget the left side for tonight, and let's get this plane out of here. So the guys, they spent most of their shift replacing the right side boot.
A few hours later, mechanics finished changing the de-ice boot and reinstalled the right side leading edge.
So your mechanics didn't do any work at all on the left side?
No, we didn't touch it.
After having changed just the right de-ice boot, Airplane 701 is rolled out to the gate for the first flight of the day. Three hours later, the left leading edge rips off the tail, causing the aircraft to plummet almost 12,000 feet to the ground. Back in Washington, NTSB investigators try to piece together the information they've gathered so far.
Dillon and Lepage.
The individual mechanics, the supervisors, in general, I thought we had good cooperation. They did describe what they were doing. I think they were credible. I believe they were trying to help.
Where was Anderson if he was helping?
We had about 10 hours.
No way we were going to get both sides done.
Had some time to lend a hand. The second shift.
Investigators are almost certain that the screws were removed from the top of the left side leading edge and never replaced. But maintenance workers insist they only worked on the right side. Investigators are puzzled.
So the second shift started the job. These guys, they started on the right side. Their inspector, he helped them.
It's always dangerous when you change from one shift to another shift, and that's why there are very strict procedures about that. They were bypassing them. The inspector jumped in to get this airplane moving. That was all disturbing.
Did he ever say what he did up there? Yeah, that's great. Let me see that. Help the mechanics remove the de-ice boots. What does that mean?
Malcolm Brenner returns to Houston to try to determine precisely what work Inspector Anderson performed on the doomed plane.
Help mechanics remove de-ice boots. It's a very simple statement. It's not specific as to what was taken off the aircraft, what was done, where the maintenance stood at that time of the shift turnover.
Help the mechanics remove the de-ice boots. What did you do? Well, it wasn't that busy, so I offered to help the guys.
The inspector went up on the man lift and started helping the mechanics. That's not his job. He said he wasn't too busy and they needed help. They're going to turn this around. It wasn't his role. It wasn't a good idea.
So what side did you work on, Troy? Just the right?
Both. Look, when I left, the plan was to do both sides.
For me, the most disturbing was the inspector. He was up there and he was the one who actually took the screws off. Part of the philosophy of maintenance is that you have one group that does the work, and then you have another group, the best of the best, the cream of the cream, who are then inspecting the work, and their function is to sign off and make sure that this work is being done properly. He had a bag of 40 screws, and he left the bag of 40 screws that he took out on the man lift for the oncoming shift.
You started the left side yet?
No.
I spoke with the second shift supervisor. We decided to skip the left side.
So he asked the supervisor, have you done any work on the left side? The supervisor looked up and said, no, not that I know of.
Guys, forget the left side for tonight, and let's get this plane out of here.
No one on the midnight shift knew that Anderson had started pulling screws from the left side.
The work records weren't done. And the procedures, even though they're in place and should have worked, they weren't followed.
Did you give your mechanics the paperwork to fill out on the job?
No. Sometimes the paperwork takes longer than the job itself.
On a shift turnover, that's one of the critical things that you have. You have a written record that anyone can go back to. It wasn't done.
None of the mechanics from the evening shift filled in the cards which detail the work they've done for the next shift.
Paperwork is never fun, and then when you're describing something you've already done, people don't necessarily want to do that. I've already done it. I did it. I don't necessarily want to go back and write it down that I did it.
And we asked the supervisor, why wasn't it done? And he said, well, it's a simple procedure, and sometimes it's not worth doing. If you take out a bunch of screws, you wouldn't issue the work cards. It's more trouble than to do it. That was disturbing.
And Inspector Troy Anderson was vague about the work he did.
His write-up didn't really describe the fact that he took the screws out on the left.
He did not see his role as a mechanic on that aircraft, so I think perhaps he didn't take writing on those cards as seriously as he should have, because that was the mechanic's job to do that.
A failure in routine maintenance caused the crash of Flight 2574. But there is still one lingering question.
Captured on the right.
The plane flew more than 800 kilometers before the leading edge tore off.
It is pretty amazing that the horizontal tail stayed intact for that first flight.
The deadly failure came near the end of the crew's second flight that day.
Pushing this descent, making like the space shuttle.
Why didn't it happen sooner? Investigators pore over the recorded data from both flights. They compare flight parameters like speed, heading, altitude, in search of anything that might provide an answer.
It was a question of, how much the forces would have changed.
They zero in on the plane's airspeed during descent. Just before its fatal dive, Flight 2574 hit a speed of 260 knots. Though safe under normal conditions, that's close to top speed and 44 knots faster than the previous descent. They conduct a study to confirm suspicions that those 44 extra knots were enough to trigger disaster. The leading edge stays on at 216 knots, the plane's maximum speed during the first flight.
The aerodynamic forces never quite rose to the level that they did on the accident flight.
But an increase of 44 knots drastically increases the amount of drag on the leading edge.
Once the plane got up near its maximum speed, it had this failure waiting to happen.
The tragic significance of First Officer Radosevich's last words is now clear to investigators.
Pushing this descent, making like the space shuttle.
His high-speed descent sealed the fate of Flight 2574.
The airplane broke apart at the highest speed that it reached since the maintenance was done the night before. The aerodynamic forces were very high, and so eventually they were enough to bend the leading edge radius downward because it wasn't attached anymore on the top of the horizontal tail, and they bent it downward to the point where finally the oncoming air was powerful enough to break it off.
At 260 knots, the leading edge rips off.
When that part failed, the plane was unflyable.
High speed, oil, high speed.
I mean, the force was so violent.
Engine.
On the cockpit voice recording, the pilots don't say anything after it happens. They were probably incapacitated. It's that violent.
The massive negative G-force would have instantly sent blood rushing to the brains of the passengers and crew, rendering them unconscious. The NTSB blames the accident on the failure to reinsert all the screws holding the left leading edge to the tail.
My heart reached out to the people that had worked on the airplane because I knew this was a human error. And whoever had been involved in that maintenance, I'm sure, was going to feel very badly about the situation.
The safety board also takes the unprecedented step of faulting Continental Express for not making sure all maintenance procedures were followed. In particular, the failure to ensure the mechanics and inspectors completed the proper paperwork.
Sometimes the paperwork takes longer than the job itself.
This was a preventable accident. If they had strictly followed those procedures, this accident should not have happened.
The Continental Express accident is such a watershed moment for accidents and accident investigation in particular, because it's one of the first times that the culture of the organization was mentioned in an accident investigation.
Never before has the NTSB cited an airline's senior management for allowing a climate where rules get bent.
Leadership needs to understand their accountability in these accidents and have more commitment towards the people on the line so that they can do their jobs properly and effectively.
As a result of the crash, airlines now put much greater emphasis on making sure all safety procedures are followed. They use computerized systems to more precisely track mechanics' work. But better technology is only part of the solution.
One of the things we try and get people on the front line to do is talk. We try and encourage them to speak up, that there are no stupid questions. Every question is important.
This is a case where small deviations by many people, where cutting corners in small ways that appear small to each person can accumulate to cause this horrible accident. Horrible and preventable accident.
A passenger plane is obliterated in the California hills.
There were no wings, no fuselage. There was no tail section. There were no aircraft seats.
Hardened steel is ripped to pieces.
This was the worst damage I've ever seen.
The wreckage paints a grim picture of the final moments of Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771. The plane reached impossibly high speeds.
They tell us that it actually broke the sound barrier.
Passengers experienced crippling G-forces.
We assessed the impact forces around 5,000 Gs.
It would have been a horrifying experience, the final few seconds of their lives.
Whatever brought down Flight 1771, investigators are certain of one thing. It was not an accident.
Mayday, Mayday.
Los Angeles International Airport, one of the busiest in the world. Every year, 40 million passengers arrive and depart through LAX. At Terminal 1, a group of passengers and crew bound for San Francisco are making their way through security. A short while later, they board Pacific Southwest Airlines Flight 1771.
Pacific Southwest really was what we'd call a large regional airline at the time.
Maybe you set me up with a scotch on your way back?
They had service in about 30 cities all over, mostly the western part of the United States.
The flight from Los Angeles to San Francisco is one of the most popular routes at Pacific Southwest, also known as PSA. Among the 38 passengers are several PSA employees, including the airline's chief pilot.
It's very common for airline employees to commute between cities for work, and so people would take a bus to work. Many airline employees take a plane to work.
Captain Greg Lindemood has been flying with PSA for 14 years. The father of 3 is also a decorated combat veteran.
Brakes. Brake set. Flaps up. Spoilers retracted.
First Officer James Nunn only joined the airline the previous spring. He's also logged thousands of hours in the cockpit.
Thrust levers.
Today, they're piloting a British-built BAE 146 commuter jet. With quiet turbofan engines, it's designed for short-haul flights over densely populated areas. The flight to San Francisco will take just over an hour.
So do you know what you're getting boys for Christmas?
Well, it's gonna be Nintendo, and with what it costs, I think they can both share it.
Anything to drink, guys?
I'm fine, thanks.
Okay, just holler if you change your mind.
Flight 1771 is cruising at 22,000 feet above the California countryside.
Can you ask him how it's been?
Just over halfway through the flight, Captain Lindemood worries about the mild turbulence.
Center, PSA 1771. Any reports on the ride ahead? We've had a little continuous light chop.
PSA, this is Rocky Mountain Center. It's not too bad.
My God, that was a gun. Yeah.
The crew now has a much bigger problem on its hands.
Squawk 77, Squawk 77. We've had a gun fired on board the aircraft.
You want to go to Monterey? Could you make it, sir?
Moments later, Flight 1771 falls into a steep dive.
Witnesses caught a brief glimpse of the aircraft as it was plummeting down from the sky.
It was going at a high rate of speed. Looked like a dart just diving to the ground.
Flight 1771 crashes into an isolated hill 280 kilometers northwest of Los Angeles. Police get to the crash site and find a 30-ton airliner obliterated.
There were no wings, there were no fuselage, there was no tail section, there were no aircraft seats. There was just papers everywhere. And the strong smell of aviation fuel.
It doesn't take long for Sheriff Steve Bolts to reach a grim conclusion. No one has survived the crash.
We're making a frantic search throughout this remote cow pasture looking for survivors, and we can't even find deceased human beings, much less human beings that had survived.
Most catastrophic aircraft accidents happen on takeoff or landing. A shallow impact angle can sometimes leave large sections of the plane intact, giving passengers and crew a chance at survival. The 43 people aboard Flight 1771 had no chance at all. This is one of the worst air disasters in California history.
Come on up here, guys.
The day after the crash, investigators from both the National Transportation Safety Board and the FBI are on the scene.
You ever seen anything like this? It's gonna be a long day, guys.
We knew that gunshots had been heard by the air traffic controllers.
Squawk 77, Squawk 77. We've had a gun fired on board the aircraft.
If the reports of gunshots were accurate, then I realized immediately that we had crime aboard an aircraft, for which the FBI had primary jurisdiction.
But the reports may not be accurate. The pilots and controllers may have been mistaken. Even though speculation about the gunman's identity is widespread, it's up to the NTSB to determine exactly what happened on Flight 1771.
One of the things you have to avoid in accident investigation is preconceived notions. For example, most of us never turn on the radio, never watch television on the way to the scene, because even though you might not consciously be aware of it, you can get front-loaded with information, and when you get there, you may subconsciously start looking for things to substantiate that background. So you try to arrive on scene with a totally objective view of what's going on.
While NTSB investigators try to determine the cause of the crash, law enforcement agents have questions of their own.
It's establishing who had motive, establishing who had access, establishing who was the intended victim.
Right there. They should be somewhere right in there.
The FBI is searching for evidence of a crime, the NTSB for clues about the crash. If they can recover the black boxes, they may find both.
With the total destruction of the aircraft, I mean, you had limited amounts of information that you could gather from the wreckage.
At this point, the most important thing is to get the cockpit voice recorder and get away from the speculation and see what the cockpit voice recorder tells us factually.
The flight recorders tell the tale of what happens to the aircraft. They're very important in reconstructing the events that brought the airplane down.
The impact comes in this way.
right to the tail. They should be somewhere in here. I think that's it.
After hours of searching through the shattered remains, the effort finally pays off. They recover the plane's 2 black boxes.
The first recorder that was recovered was the cockpit voice recorder, and that was recognized by its orange cover and all that, that was still, although badly mangled, was still recognizable as a recorder.
The second black box has suffered even heavier damage. The flight data recorder captures critical information about the aircraft's performance.
What a mess. What a mess.
It had been so badly mangled, it wasn't recognizable as a flight data recorder.
Both recorders will be sent to the NTSB laboratory in Washington. It is far from certain whether the data they hold can be successfully retrieved. Without it, investigators may never know what happened on Flight 1771.
That's about the first thing you do when you get on scene, find the cockpit voice recorder. You can't overemphasize how important that was in this case, because we had no airframe left to work with. We really had no wreckage in the normal sense of the word.
At the NTSB laboratory in Washington, Dennis Grossi examines Flight 1771's badly damaged cockpit voice recorder.
The case itself was basically crushed. It was bent in like somebody grabbed it and pushed it together like that. This is hardened steel, and we assessed the impact forces around 5,000 Gs just based on the deformation of the crash enclosure.
The recorder, the aircraft, and everyone on board suffered an impact force 5,000 times the force of gravity. The world's best fighter pilots can handle a sustained force of 9 Gs. In a crash, the human body can sometimes survive 100 Gs for a split second. A force 50 times as strong is difficult to comprehend. Dennis Grossi knows the immense impact may have ruined any chance of hearing the last words from the cockpit of Flight 1771.
No crash investigation is routine, but among the jigsaw puzzle of pieces from Flight 1771, investigators are looking for something very different, perhaps a gun.
Finding the weapon could help the FBI identify who might have fired shots on board Flight 1771. But for the NTSB, gunfire alone does not explain this accident. A bullet should not bring down a modern commercial jet.
There's a lot of misconception about decompression and about whether or not for example, a single shot could bring down an aircraft. And if it's simply a shot through the fuselage of the aircraft, the answer would be no.
It takes a much larger hole in the fuselage for there to be an explosive decompression. The kind of hole that led to one of the deadliest air disasters of all time. In 1974, a faulty cargo door blew off Turkish Airlines Flight 981. The decompression caused the cabin floor to collapse, severing the flight control cables. The crash killed all 346 people on board.
The aircraft would normally not come down just from a bullet hole with no other implications. It just wouldn't be enough to cause an explosive decompression, which is what you almost have to bring the aircraft down.
If a gunshot didn't bring the plane down, then investigators need to find out what did. At the NTSB lab in Washington, work to recover Flight 1771's cockpit voice recording has produced a surprising result. Despite suffering huge impact forces, the audio tape is still intact.
All right, let's give it a listen.
The first 28 minutes of the tape reveal a routine flight.
It's gonna be Nintendo.
The crew was trying to find out when the turbulence they had been flying through would end.
Can you ask him how it's been?
Center, PSA 1771. Any reports on the ride ahead? We've had a little continuous light chop.
PSA, this is Rocky Mountain Center. It's not too bad.
We hear the flight crew talk, you know, do their normal procedures.
But in the final 2 minutes, events take a chilling turn.
Sure sounds like a gunshot.
And then all of a sudden, they hear, and we hear on the recording, this gunshot.
The tape confirms what the pilots had reported. 2 gunshots.
God, that was a gun. Yeah, I know.
Squawk 77, we've had a gun fired on board the aircraft.
It was actually a very sobering moment because we realized that we were listening to 2 people communicating with each other, the pilot and the co-pilot, in a very routine flight that suddenly became anything but routine. It was something that one doesn't quickly forget.
Investigators listen as the situation becomes increasingly disturbing.
The door to the cockpit was heard open, and a female voice, presumably the flight attendant, was heard to say in a voice that was filled with alarm,
There's a problem, Captain!
And we heard a voice, a male voice, which we presumed to be the captain, saying, what's the nature of the problem?
What's the problem? I'm the problem.
Investigators now know for certain that the killer was a man and that he shot the flight crew.
It's always startling when you hear something like that, when you hear the commission of a murder. As accident investigators, you just don't hear that. This was a very unusual recording.
A flight attendant and both pilots are shot.
That's 5 shots so far.
And then we could hear the cockpit door shut again, and another final shot, the 6th shot.
Before the tape ends, they hear one last ominous sound.
The plane's in a dive. The engines are over-revving.
Within about 5 seconds, we picked up what's called windscreen noise. In other words, you could tell that the aircraft was accelerating.
That noise increased in its pitch. We learned, of course, that it was going into a dive at that point.
65 seconds after the murder of its crew, Flight 1771 smashes into the California hills.
It helped us to understand what we were investigating, the heinousness of the crime that we were investigating.
The CVR recording changes the NTSB's role in the case.
Let me know if I can help.
It just confirms that this wasn't an accident, that it was, in fact, a crime, and the FBI would be taking over the investigation from here on out.
The FBI, bear in mind, knows how to investigate crime. They don't necessarily know how to investigate an aircraft accident. So we would go ahead and do our normal investigative procedures and make that information available to the FBI.
The FBI is investigating a murder, but solving it is now just one of their priorities.
What's the problem? I'm the problem.
The CVR recording has highlighted another pressing issue.
Somehow, someone managed to get a gun on that plane.
A weapon was smuggled through LAX, one of the world's busiest airports. Investigators wonder how the shooter managed to evade airport security.
Let's find out how that guy got on the plane, all right?
If the FBI can't find answers soon, more lives could be at risk. 2 days after the downing of Flight 1771, investigators are still combing through the wreckage for a piece of evidence rarely found at a crash site. A murder weapon.
That's a hydraulic line, probably from the main gear.
The search for the gun was very frustrating because we knew that that played a major role in what had happened. We needed to know for sure that the gun was there. I mean, it's a supposition, pretty good supposition that there is a gun involved.
We weren't sure that we would succeed because the field of debris was so wide and the impact had reduced the airplane to so many small pieces.
While the search for the gun continues in California, NTSB investigators in Washington try to determine what caused Flight 1771 to go into a sudden dive after the crew was shot. Dennis Grossi believes the answer may lie in the shattered remains of the FDR, the flight data recorder.
The internal magazine that held the tape was the only part that was actually recovered. The rest was not recovered.
Worse still, almost all the tape that records data is gone, torn from the machine when it slammed into the ground.
This was the worst damage I've ever seen.
Grossi examines a critical part of the recorder, the tape heads that lay down data onto the magnetic tape. He finds a tiny piece of recording tape has survived.
The magazine didn't survive, and the tape itself was destroyed, except for about a 6 to 8 inch piece of tape that ran around the recording heads and the capstan.
With such a short piece of tape, it's doubtful there will be any useful information on it at all.
We worked real hard at trying to get all the data that we could off of that little piece of tape.
Investigators in California finally find what they've been hunting for: the barrel of a gun.
The gun was found by one of the FBI agents pretty much in the middle of where the aircraft impacted.
We were very, very fortunate when we found the gun. It was an unbelievable stroke of luck.
It's not just any gun. It's a .44 caliber Magnum.
A .44 Magnum was considered the most powerful handgun that you can have.
But the barrel alone isn't enough. They need the rest of the weapon. Fortunately, they find it. The cylinder with 6 spent cartridges.
Its frame is very powerfully constructed, so for it to tear the barrel off just suggests the power of that crash impact.
The shattered pistol leads to a morbid discovery.
When we found what was left of the gun, there was a portion of the finger between the trigger and the trigger guard. That went back to the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia.
Lab analysis may help solve a mystery that hangs over the entire investigation. The FBI has a weapon, a crime scene, and 42 murder victims. What's missing is proof of the identity of the 43rd person on board, the killer.
We, in our investigation today here at the site, have located a weapon, and that weapon is going to be examined, and of course any connection between it and the crime will be more fully developed.
We needed to determine a motive for why someone would do such a thing. Somebody would have had to fire those gunshots, and there had to be a reason for it.
It's part of a seat, part of the frame.
Really, as far as the investigation on scene, it's totally NTSB, as far as the kick in the tin, if you will. But we were able to answer questions that might arise from the FBI investigators on scene. As I say, they don't have the expertise to know what to look for, but from the criminal aspects of it, they certainly know what to ask about.
Part of a frame.
At the crash site, the NTSB has recovered a piece of wreckage that could help explain what happened on Flight 1771. A fragment of a passenger seat.
We actually found a seat that had a bullet hole in it.
If they can determine exactly where the seat was located, then PSA's passenger seating records could give investigators the name of another one of the victims shot before the plane went down. Dennis Grossi has done all he can to salvage data from the small fragment of tape recovered from the flight data recorder.
I was able to decode that little strip of tape, and I got the last seconds.
It does contain data, but only 6 seconds worth. Investigators learned that in its final moments, the aircraft was operating normally, with no mechanical problems, except for one thing. Someone had pushed the control column forward. forcing the plane into a steep dive. The aircraft accelerated to the speed of sound.
Went in from 22,000 feet with cruise power on all 4 engines.
Investigators now understand why only very small pieces of wreckage were found at the crash site.
When the aircraft hit at such a high speed, it impacted and basically compressed the Earth, and then it released and it blew everything back out of the hole.
The heavy impact propelled some debris straight back into the air before it could be singed by the explosion.
All the light material, all of the paper on the aircraft, any of the insulation material on the aircraft, all that light stuff got blown up into the air, and then the wind carried it for, I believe, miles.
The fact that the plane was forced into a dive explains why PSA 1771 crashed so quickly. It also adds even greater urgency to the FBI investigation. Since it was almost certainly the killer's hand on the controls, this is now the worst mass murder in California history. But investigators still don't have enough evidence to be certain who the killer was, nor who he was trying to kill. Was it the work of a madman who wanted to commit mass murder? Or did the killer target one particular passenger and coldly sacrifice everyone else on board? The FBI investigation into the onboard shooting and fatal crash of PSA Flight 1771 has uncovered a lapse in security at LAX. It may explain how a gun was smuggled onto the aircraft.
Any number of people in the airport could bypass the security screening that was going on.
Agent Bretzing learns that airline employees with valid identification are allowed to bypass security at LAX.
What they had set up is a bypass for crew members and airport employees, actually anybody that had the proper badge. You would show your badge and they would allow you to bypass both the metal detector and the X-ray unit.
It was a big loophole.
Bretzing knows the killer was a man, and from Flight 1771's passenger manifest, he can see that there were 4 male passengers who worked for either Pacific Southwest or its parent airline, US Air.
It's one of these guys.
We suppose that he did in fact bypass security, carrying the weapon.
Investigators need to prove conclusively who smuggled the gun on board. At the FBI laboratory, forensic specialists analyze the piece of skin found in the trigger guard. A technician is able to get a fingerprint from the skin fragment. In search of a match, he compares the print to those on file for the 4 male passengers who could have bypassed security. And he finds a match.
There was enough of the forefinger that they were able to peel open and then match it.
Just days after the crash that claimed 43 lives, the FBI has positively identified their killer.
That was a key element in the investigation.
His name is David Burke.
David Burke cleaned the airline. He was one of those employees who would go in after he had landed and help to clean up the inside.
Investigators now know David Burke smuggled a gun on board Flight 1771. What they now need to explain is why.
A motive gives you understanding. It helps to develop the full mosaic of the crime. Knowing the motive, you're able to conclusively determine what happened.
Day 3 at the crash site. Still sifting through the strewn remains of the plane, investigators uncover a bizarre but telling piece of evidence. one that points directly to the motive behind David Burke's crime.
During the search, one of our people found an air sickness bag and knew immediately that it was a pertinent piece to the puzzle.
Because he pushed the plane into such a steep dive, Burke unwittingly ensured that the vital clue could be discovered.
The air sickness bag had a very ominous message pinned on it.
Burke had written the unsigned note during the flight. He expressed a grudge against a man called Ray.
Hi, Ray. I think it's sort of ironical that we end up like this. I asked for some leniency for my family, remember? Well, I got none, and you'll get none. That was the message that we recovered from that air sickness bag.
The air sickness bag is the conclusive clue they've been searching for, the clue that establishes David Burke's motive. The Ray in the note is identified as airline station manager Ray Thompson. He worked for PSA's parent company, US Air. He was also David Burke's former boss.
Ray Thompson was the supervisor.
By now, Bretzing has also learned that Burke had a troubled history, both with the company and with the law.
Burke had worked for US Air for 14 years, most of them at the airport in Rochester, New York.
There was allegations of criminal activity when he was back in Rochester.
Burke was someone they had watched carefully for narcotic trafficking and larceny.
Allegations that Burke smuggled cocaine on commercial flights were never proven.
Well, basically, he just apparently stayed one step ahead of us. But the bottom line is that he wasn't charged.
He moved to the West Coast, presumably to kind of get away from the heat, if you would.
But 3 weeks before the crash, Burke ran into more trouble. He was fired from the company after being caught on tape helping himself to the in-flight bar proceeds.
He had stolen some money from the fund that the flight attendants use when they're making change, and he had stolen what amounted to $69. And this was the straw that broke the camel's back.
3 weeks after being fired, Burke was given an opportunity to appeal.
Mr. Burke had been terminated several weeks prior to the flight.
Thanks for coming in, David.
He then came back for an appeal hearing on the day of the flight.
I've reviewed your file.
He was terminated by Ray Thompson.
Your appeal, it's been denied.
Under intense financial pressure, Burke was near the end of his rope.
Why you gotta be such a jerk?
That termination interview was not a placid one.
My decision's final, Mr. Burke.
Thank you very much.
As he left Thompson's office, Burke made a remark that hinted at plans for revenge.
The secretary had said, David, I hope you have a nice day. And David Burke, the suspect, paused at the door, turned to her and said,
Oh, I plan to have a very nice day.
When he was fired, he still had his credentials. Got to remember, this was 1987. Security was a lot different than it is now.
What you got there?
Investigators now know that in the days leading up to the crash, David Burke went from a grieved ex-employee to a man coldly planning murder. Now they need to find out all they can about his movements on the day of the crash.
What can you tell me about David Burke?
After his meeting with Thompson, he went to his locker, possibly to get the gun.
But he went to his locker the day of that flight, prior to the flight. Whether he retrieved his gun from the locker or not, we are not sure.
Instead of returning to the office, Burke decided to buy a ticket for Flight 1771. a flight he knew Ray Thompson would be on.
Ray Thompson lived in San Francisco, and he flew regularly on that flight to return to San Francisco at the end of the day. It was common knowledge among the employees that Ray Thompson would be on that flight.
Why Burke opted to kill so many others along with his former boss is a question that defies rational explanation.
The average person certainly would not act with the rage and the vengeance that had to consume David Burke prior to this act. One can only imagine that there must have been something else wrong with David Burke.
He just decided to take it out as an act of revenge against the company. I don't know that there's any other motivation that we can come up with.
It's clear Burke's attack on Flight 1771 was meticulously planned. But exactly how events unfolded once his rampage began is still uncertain. NTSB investigators have provided a big piece of the puzzle. They've been able to match up the bullet-punctured seat fragment with an exact onboard location, row 4, seat C. Records show that on Flight 1771, that seat was unoccupied. But the seat directly in front of that empty seat was occupied by Ray Thompson. The finding points to the sheer power of Burke's .44 caliber handgun. His first 2 shots pierced not 1, but 2 airline seats.
The bullet hole would have been made as the bullet passed through Ray Thompson and then entered that seat and left a bullet hole there.
They now know that Burke shot at least 4 people during his rage-filled assault on Flight 1771. Ray Thompson and 3 crew members. That accounts for 5 shots. But investigators heard 6 shots on the tape. They must account for them all. The gunshot sounds were picked up by a microphone in the cockpit. By comparing the sound pattern of each shot, investigators can determine if they were fired in the cockpit or the passenger cabin.
The shots that were fired in the plane, not in the cockpit, but in the plane, were distinct but muffled.
Other shots were louder and clearer, indicating they were fired closer to the CVR microphone.
The shots that were fired in the cockpit were very loud. We had 3 shots that were fired outside the cockpit and 3 shots that were fired inside the cockpit.
Investigators don't know who was shot with the final bullet, just that it was fired in the cabin. It's enough for them to finally piece together a picture of the horrific final moments on board PSA 1771.
What the hell?
You can imagine what Ray Thompson must have thought as this person whom he had just terminated a few hours before walks past him in the airline, hands him this note, and then probably goes into the men's room. And he's reading this note with its ominous message.
Next, they hear the sound of the lavatory door opening.
So we're assuming that he handed Ray the note, went into the restroom, where he took out the gun, came back out, we heard the door close again, just before the shots.
Ray!
Ray Thompson probably has the most merciful of all the deaths on that plane.
In less than a minute, a routine flight has become a nightmare.
There's a problem, Captain!
What's the problem?
He was very careful. He had done the planning thus far fairly well, and we believe he followed through with that plan.
I'm the problem.
It wouldn't take much knowledge or experience on a passenger part to know that they were in deep, deep trouble.
There's a problem, Captain!
After shooting his former boss and 3 crew members, David Burke pushed Flight 1771 into a dive and left the cockpit. The airline's chief pilot was now the only person on board who could pull the plane out of the dive.
An off-duty pilot may have been moving himself forward to try to render whatever assistance he could once he realized something drastic was happening.
What the hell are you doing? You gotta let me in there. Don't do this. Come on.
But Burke had 1 bullet
What
left.
the hell are you doing?
That may have accounted for the 6th shot. There are some who speculate that David Burke was taking his own life. The evidence suggests otherwise. Had David Burke been taking his own life, the gun would have fallen from his hand after he had shot himself.
But since a fragment of Burke's fingertip was recovered from the trigger guard, Bretzing reasons that the killer was alive, holding onto the gun until the very moment of impact.
Alarms were sounding in the cockpit. There was increased noise of the plane plummeting. Then just before impact, it became silent. They tell us that it actually broke the sound barrier. Of course, it would have been a horrifying experience, the final few seconds of their lives.
One man's rage meant 2 minutes of pure terror for 42 people.
The FBI believes 1 man was responsible for the crash of PSA Flight 1771 in the hills of San Luis Obispo County, in which all 43 on board were killed.
With all of the evidence that we have recovered here, that we would have more than sufficient to charge David Burke with the violation of the air piracy statute.
The unprecedented crime is solved. But aviation authorities are left with a troubling question. Could it happen again? The tragedy of Flight 1771 provoked action from the Federal Aviation Administration. The body that regulates the airline industry took urgent measures to tighten security.
The FAA came out and canceled the bypass authority, so therefore air crews and employees would have to go through the normal screening as any passenger would.
Now it's required that any employee that leaves an airline, whether they've been fired or quit or retired or whatever, must turn their credentials in immediately. Getting on an aircraft with a gun now, I won't say that it's impossible, but it's next to impossible.
But the new measures would not prevent the world's deadliest hijacking incident. The 9/11 attacks would usher in sweeping new airline security procedures.
After 9/11, several security gaps were certainly plugged.
There are now federal air marshals on board many domestic U.S. flights.
These are armed officers that are on flights in plain clothes.
Cockpit doors have been reinforced with Kevlar, and they stay locked throughout all flights.
The doors are built so that they're very hard to get through. They're ballistically sound. If David Burke was on a plane today, when he got to the cockpit, he couldn't have gotten in with the weapon he had, so he would have been able to still injure or kill people in the back, but he could not have brought the plane down.
Finally, many domestic airline pilots are now allowed to carry firearms. All of these measures have made flying safer, but nothing can completely eliminate the risk of another David Burke.
Well, in my view, aviation security has been heightened tremendously. But we still have a ways to go, and aviation will always be a target.